What do customers want from brands in the future? What type of experience could a brand deliver that's different from today? MC, welcome.
Hey, Dave.
Back again for another year.
Yeah, 2020.
2020. Feeling good?
Yeah, feeling great.
Nice. So let's talk about the future of brand.
It's a good time to do it, I guess. New
Yeah.
Year's.
Yeah.
Looking
yeah.
forward.
Resolutions, all that sort of stuff. It's interesting when you think about what's ahead for the future of brand and how brands could potentially evolve. And the first place that my mind goes to is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're probably living in a culture now that expects transparency, doesn't always get it. And many spheres, like politics, for example, we are, mistrusting and find it difficult to believe in political brands. And I think as a result, that trust can be built in other places through brands that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. And so transparency, I think, is becoming a big factor.
Yep.
But I think possibly as brands, we still feel a bit unsure about how much should you share, and how transparent you should be.
Yeah.
So that would be the first place to start, I think.
Yeah. I think what's interesting to me about the transparency angle, and you say customers expect it, that sort of thing, brands are unsure, is I think what you're also seeing is it's getting to a point often where like brands don't have a choice anymore. And what I mean by that is you're even seeing, I think, a lot more sort of exposés into brands and their culture and, what they're really about and really like behind the scenes. Certainly the Uber example comes to mind where, shiny, glossy brand and seemingly everyone loves them, but then it's exposed that they have a really toxic culture and, what impact does that have on the business and the brand?
Yeah, what was I'm vaguely aware of the story, but what was the fallout from all of that?
Well, that in itself is interesting, is like how much damage did it actually do in the end? Uber's still pretty ubiquitous.
Yep.
How much of that is just market domination versus people loving the brand? You're certainly seeing a few more competitors pop up in that space, and
I'm seeing a lot of new stickers on the back of Ubers with some of the other ride-sharing ride apps.
And I do wonder, is that door left a little bit more ajar because of some negative feelings toward Uber? Whether it's even, the general culture was, seen to be quite sexist and oppressive and, just chaotic and that sort of thing, and didn't treat their staff particularly well. But I think there's also some, sort of growing concern about how much they pay their drivers and all that sort of stuff. I know there's new laws in California that is actually changing the employment law to sort of handle the gig economy and what that's going to do, as a knock-on effect to brands like Uber and stuff like that. So it's interesting. There's definitely fallout, but then as you say, like if I was going to go somewhere now, I'd probably still use Uber too. But I guess to bring it back around to that transparency thing, I think that, to your point, it is going to be more and more important, to be transparent, but also to make sure that if someone does peek behind the curtain, that they're going to like what they see.
They like what they see. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, because at some point, the customer, the user, is going to have an opportunity to peek behind the curtain, whether that's an expose piece that's some reporters doing on the business, or whether it's leaked memos, which is usually what happens now. And in staff culture.
Yeah, I was telling you guys about that Away brand, which is a luxury luggage brand that presents an amazing glossy image, and particularly on Instagram with their ads, and it's a really nice product and even something that I was interested in. And then there was a story on The Verge about how toxic their culture is and how they treat their staff really poorly, and even some of the product issues and customer service issues that they've had. And it's another good example where it's almost like I think you're going to get caught out. The interesting thing about that to me is it brings it all the way back around to a theme that we've been banging on about the whole time, which is about being authentic in the first place.
Yeah.
Transparency is a bad thing for you if what you're presenting up front is not what you're delivering, behind the scenes. It's not a problem if you are your brand, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah. So another way of saying it is expect to be transparent.
Yeah.
Expect to be open. Expect to be an open book on on your brand, because at some point your customers, your users are going to want to look a little closer at the brand they're dealing with.
Yeah, and as we talked about, there's all those other benefits of being authentic in the first place anyway. It'll ring more true, it'll feel more authentic for you and your staff. It'll just be something that you can back up and deliver if you're authentic in the first place. And then I just think that if you follow that kind of guidance, then you're going to have less issues if and when transparency becomes a thing.
Yeah, and transparency is interesting in terms of how far you can go with transparency. Like, I was on a website a couple of months ago, and it was showing you, it was an e-commerce website, and I can't remember what it was for. I think it was actually for shoes. And it showed you, like, the landed costs into Australia, then the markup, then all the, like, the overhead costs that go into, like, making it, and so it. And then it ran it out in a retail price.
Yeah.
So it was like full transparency on the retail price, which is, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, oof, that feels like they're exposing too much of themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Went on to read a bunch of reviews about it, and hugely successful company. So even though you know how much money they're making on every pair of shoes, there's this weird sort of like trust element that then comes into it.
Sure, yeah.
So, it's an interesting spectrum. But I think we're aligned in saying that transparency is going to be one of those tenets in the future that you want to master as a brand.
Yeah.
You got to decide what's right in terms of, how transparent you want to be. Maybe you don't want to go down to that pricing level. But I also think that applies with employees as well. I mean, a lot of companies do open book reporting now, share their very sensitive financial numbers with employees.
Yep.
And that's important, I think, for culture as well too. Understand how well your company's doing.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I saw another good example on the transparency front. So got a body shop product at home, and actually has a little sticker on it of like a little illustrative avatar of the person who made it. So it's obviously manufactured overseas, but they're actually identifying, this product was made by Ethan, and it's a photo of, not a photo, but like a digital illustration of the guy who made it.
Right.
So again, they're being transparent, I guess, about where and how it's manufactured, and that there is a human element behind it.
Yeah, interesting.
Which I think definitely dovetails into the social responsibility side of things as well.
For sure.
It's something that you wanted to touch on.
Oh, well, I mean, I think social responsibility is a big aspect of a brand now, but also I think we're just at the start of that.
Yeah.
I think we're only really just starting to scratch the surface of what that means to be socially aware as a brand. I was going to say woke then, but that's so bad.
That would be very unwoke of us.
Yeah, that would be very unwoke. And I feel in a lot of ways that this may be a controversial point, but politics, I think, in particular in Australia, and also if you look globally, is a bit broken. Like, that business model is broken. I mean, politics really hasn't been reformed in such a long time. Versus, say, the speed at which the economy and the companies which operate within that economy have to reinvent themselves time and time and time again. Politics hasn't kind of been through that so much, and therefore I think when we look for leadership, we're not tending to look in the traditional places that we would normally look, which would be to, like, our nation's leaders. And there's a bit of a broad sweeping statement, but we're starting to look at brands, and I think how our brands are leading some of those discussions around inclusiveness or environmental awareness, climate change. Some of those the big issues are really kind of now being driven by brands and having that conversation. Like Patagonia, we've talked about Patagonia a lot.
Yep.
I mean, they're a brand that have been doing this since the 70s, so it's kind of really been built into their DNA. But more than ever, like brands like that have a platform now in which to talk about some of those things. And I can only see, as I say, we're just scratching the surface of what it means to be, socially aware, and to align yourself. Because I think it was almost like a bit of corporate suicide to align yourself with a cause, with a mission, with stuff that was happening, in our lives. But now I think we look to our brands to do that.
Yeah, certainly. I think the customer expectation, has continued to rise and will keep continuing to rise in terms of, even brands that don't necessarily have that as their main platform, that at least they have some element of that, or that if they are involved in manufacturing or overseas labor in some way, that they're taking all that into account and being transparent about it, as we talked about. That's almost just becoming, I think, sort of a square one type thing for a lot of brands.
Yeah, domestically here, when we're talking about, climate change has been a real hot button with the recent bushfires, and policy takes a long time to form up in decades in essence. Whereas you've got companies out there who are just doing it right now. Like, it's just because they think that that's the right thing to do. That's the way to contribute. That's the way to grow in a way that's sustainable to the planet. And they're not waiting for the policy change. They're not waiting to be mandated. Like, you have to do this now. Like, they're doing it. And I think they're the brands that we're going to connect with in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think what's interesting about that statement you made before about the idea that we're not looking to our typical leaders, but we're looking to brands and our business leaders. I think the somewhat, possibly scary flip side of that is some of the bigger brands in the world and their sort of, monopolization and potentially, negative effects that you have from these giant companies like Facebook and Google, and they're so big and so much a power to themselves that they are creating social change that's not necessarily for the better.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's definitely the role also for government to play in that, in regulating some of that. It's just they're a little bit slow to get to the space.
Yeah, and I guess the reason partly I wanted to bring that up too, in terms of bring it back to the brand conversation, is I think figuring out how, as a brand, you'll deal with unintended consequences is a really interesting idea at the moment. And so, you've seen, the likes of Apple and Google introduce things, tools on their phones that are actually designed to help you use the phone less, because they've realized that there's this unintended consequences of making their products so great and addictive, essentially, that they've had to come in with tools, to help you use their products less, which sounds crazy when you put it like that. But again, they're sort of looking at an issue and thinking as a brand how they're going to have to deal with that. Which I think is really interesting. Certainly social media sort of playing into some of the same issues. Like, you've seen Instagram remove the number of likes from posts in some countries, to sort of, I guess, get, reverse some of the potential negative effects that they create. But even some other things, like, to me, Slack's a good example where they've come out as a brand and their whole mantra was like, we'll fix productivity, we'll get rid of your emails and, everything will be great. Whereas you read endless blog posts after blog posts about how it's wrecking productivity and killing teams and everyone's spending forever on Slack, and what do we do about it, And so I just think the more that these brands sort of have these far-reaching consequences, the more they're going to have to deal with, some of the negative things that they might create.
I agree, and I would say that the speed in which some of those changes or the way that they've responded is still far quicker than a governmental response. And so I think from that point of view, it's good, but I 100% agree with you that there are going to be some unintended consequences, but also opportunities. I mean, these tech giants that are here now will still be here in a decade's time, but there might be some other big players in there that capitalise on that. That's where the opportunity kind of is born, is when people get sick of being tracked across the internet. Like, maybe they'll look for another solution to perform their searches. So I've definitely been guilty of pressing that button on my phone that says you've had enough of social media today. Do you want just 15 more minutes? Override. I need some help.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, what else is on the list? Where do you see a bit of brand building happening in the future?
Yeah, I guess one of the interesting trends, and it sort of piggybacks a bit off that I've sort of noticed a bit lately, is this idea of how social media and the habits that people have, but social is obviously a big one, like will shape which brands win. And I don't really mean that in the typical sense that you think about it from a brand and marketing point of view, like how good's your social strategy and how engaging are your social posts, but more like just seeing that certain platforms and tools and stuff actually dictate which brands do well just inherently by habit. And it's come up to me around this idea of like, say Instagram is such a popular platform and certain brands and products just do really well in that format. And so that, because they're such a big platform, they're actually influencing what types of businesses and brands do well. You know, you see a lot of stuff on there that's like individual consumer products, you know, where a single image like tells so much of the product story. So therefore those brands and products do really well on Instagram. You know, they're suited to their ad format, you know, whereas I was talking to a friend who runs his own business where he has a marketplace that's all around entertainment and trying to get artists on the platform to sell their services. And it's like, well, that whole rich story doesn't fit into a, you know, square photo. It's very hard to tell. So like that negatively influences their ability to kind of cut through on a platform like Instagram. Whereas something like, you know, a High Smile, where it's all about putting a thing in your mouth and getting a white smile, is like just tailor-made for that platform. So it's just kind of interesting to me that because some of these things are so big and so powerful, they can literally influence, you know, the sort of success or failure of different types of business models.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like brands that do the right thing, that stand for something, they will be the ones that we trust most and eventually will win as well. I can see that it's not that we're getting more moralistic about the brands that we want to not work with, but, you know, patronage.
Buy from.
It's just, I think that we want to look to those brands as beacons for how we want to live our lives as well too, to reflect, you know, the types of values that we have.
Which is classic brand theory, you know, that hasn't changed for decades. But I think your point is as well that the values that we have as a society or want to reflect have changed and become more social.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Other one on my list, personalization. I mean, I think that, and this is probably born out of technology, that we're able to get more personalized in the brand journey now. So we can have more of those one-on-one type conversations at scale with our customers. And so we have to think about that as brands, like how do we leverage that? And where's that all kind of going? Because that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
But the little caveat with that, I think, is we have to make sure that we keep, if we're going to use tech, which most of us will, or have a tech component to our business model, that we keep the human element there. And I think that's going to be a critical place to win, is to make sure that we just don't feel like we're talking to robots. Because I know when I'm being botted, I know that I'm being botted. Like I know that when I receive a templated response in email, even though it's meant to be customized, I know that it's just, you know, and to be honest, it feels a little bit hollow. But there are starting to become examples out there of where companies are doing that one-on-one interaction a lot better, at scale.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Yeah, I mean, that sort of ties into probably the last one that I had, which was, I guess, the ongoing rise in importance of user experience. And, you know, that's in some ways not something new. You know, it feels like something that we've been talking about for years. But again, I think like the social aspect, it's definitely grown, but it's just going to continue to grow. And I think particularly, as you say, in a lot of these scenarios where you are having an interaction with something that's almost purely digital, like, again, how do you keep that human element coming back into it? But how do you make sure that when your brand is the product, like they're literally the same thing, you know, is the experience, that, you know, it's engaging and creating that connection with the people that are using the product. It's not just sort of seen as very mechanical or utilitarian. Like you've got new challenges and ways, I guess, that you've got to build that connection to a brand if it's all done online sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
and I think people just generally have higher expectations. They want to do a lot more stuff for themselves. Just a lot of the self-service culture, continues to permeate that. So, yeah, certainly focus on continuing to invest in that area is going to be key.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just kind of echo a couple of things there. I mean, the one thing that I think we've got to work on as brands is to simplify the products, simplify the offering. And that's never been truer than today, and think about 5 years, 10 years in the future, because our attention is being bombarded in ways that we've never really experienced before. And so it's very, very critical that when we're putting our product offering out there in front of our customers, that we're being succinct, we're being clear, telling a good story around it, but we're not trying to overcomplicate it, because it's the last thing that our customers need is complicated products to figure out. They need simplicity.
Yeah, and I think the sort of digital economy almost rails against that, or there's just such an opportunity of like, just because you can, you do, because I can write a bit more code and I can make this thing have another feature. Like, well, why not? You might as well keep adding more to it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of added temptation and danger to do what you're saying not to do there. So it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, is that it for our list for?
I think that's it for me.
For what's happening on the future front?
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more to come. But
yeah, absolutely. All right. Cool. Thanks, MC.
Thanks, Dad.